Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. First story is titled, Downstairs Neighbor Demands That We Walk Normal. So we do, and she hates it. We've been living in this apartment for 3 years. It's old. It's cozy. The building is 20 years old, and though the appliances and wall paint and carpets have been replaced, the floor has not. It's painfully thin. Every step we take creaks and groans, and it's annoying. Living on the third floor, we know it's got to be even more so for whoever lives below us. So we've done our best to be mindful of their comfort and try not to make too much noise. We had a new downstairs neighbor move in a couple of months ago, and she is not convinced that we are literally tiptoeing around our apartment. Every time I get home and close my door, she's banging on my floor with a broom or something. Every time I cross the living room, banging. Every time I vacuum, banging. Every time my dog chews on a bone, she bangs on the dang floor, and it scares my poor dog. We've been living on eggshells trying to be courteous, but she's driving us mad with her insistent banging every time we take a step. I guess she finally had enough because she came upstairs to yell at us the other day. You're too loud. You need to be courteous and walk normal. You have neighbors, she yells. She almost looked like she was going to cry. It was disturbing. We felt bad. My husband tried to explain that, ma'am, we do our best to be quiet, but these floors are really old and they creak. We're not stomping or jumping or running. We're living, but we'll continue to be considerate. She was not impressed with this answer and continued to argue. Well, I've lived on a first floor before, and my other neighbors weren't loud like you. It's so loud, and my job is so stressful, I want you to stop stomping. I don't want to be a mean person, but I really think you're too loud. So you know what we agreed to? To walk like normal people. Okay, we'll walk normally. We said, this is exactly what we've been doing. Nothing different. So she still bangs on the floor and gives us nasty looks. But we are being normal people who walk normal and don't stomp around. Our dog is a normal dog who chews on bones and walks from his bed to his food bowl and gets excited when it's time for walkies. We are so normal. We'll be moving in the next month, so it's no skin off my back. Hope the next tenant doesn't have kids, or maybe I do, and then she'll finally understand that we are normal people who walk normal. Maybe she'll miss us. The next story is titled, Never Mess with a Rancher and a Neighbor. My father had the ultimate revenge when I was a kid. I grew up on a horse ranch in Colorado. We had a long piece of property, about 80 acres, and we raised Missouri fox trotters. We lived there for almost 20 years when some folks bought a strip of property way at the back of our land. It was a strange plot of land, as it was very narrow and was sandwiched between our back fence and a busy country road. We were surprised anyone would buy it, actually, as it forced the house to be pretty close to said road. Well, we never met these new neighbors until one day my dad gets a notice from a lawyer telling us that after having surveyed the property lines, our back fence encroaches on their property between 3 and 6 inches, depending on the spot along the fence line. These folks had never met us, never introduced themselves. Our first introduction was this legal demand. My father was a salt-of-the-earth kind of man, very kind, but also very strong-willed. He called these folks, arranged a meet-up, and tried to talk some sense into them. First, did 3 to 6 inches really matter that much? And why hadn't they come to us to talk it through? He even offered a number of different compromises. These folks were hostile from the get-go. They demanded he move the fence immediately, or they would sue. Apparently, the law stated they had to put their house so far away from our fence line, and they wanted to push it as far back from the road as they could when they built it. So they wanted that 6 inches very badly. I still remember when my dad got home from the meeting. He hung his hat up and shook his head, and when he told my mom in his slow way, well, looks like we got that kind of folks for neighbors you don't ever want to have for neighbors. They sued and won, and we were forced to move the fence in 2 weeks. I say we because I was the free slave labor, as all farm kids are in this kind of thing. All that fencing material and the time were a big cost for my family, but we got the work done in early spring. Here is where the fun comes in. So the new neighbors broke ground and built all through the end of the winter and into spring. The very next weekend after they had moved into their house, Dad rousted me out of bed and we took the big truck into town to the lumber yard. I was extremely puzzled as we loaded up a bunch of fencing material and building supplies. We didn't have any big projects going that I knew about, and I kept asking him about what it was for, but he just told me to wait and see with a devilish smile on his face. We built a pen and a small enclosure very near our back property line, directly behind the neighbor's new shiny house. The next day, one of our farm friends delivered a half-dozen pigs to their new home. Dad insisted on feeding those hogs table scraps and all the things that would go into the composter, as well as some good balanced hog feed to keep them healthy. Now, you may not know this, but the smell of pig excrement is directly related to what they eat and their pen. Table scraps makes them smell bad. I mean bad. I had to drive the four-wheeler back there every day to take care of them, and within a month, halfway there, and my eyes would start watering. It smelled so bad. When we mucked out the pen with the bobcat, we also made the pile right next to the pen. I can't even imagine how bad that smell was living in that house. The neighbors, of course, freaked out, and again, without ever even trying to talk to us, went the legal route. They lost. The area was owned agricultural, and my dad had done his homework to make sure he was breaking no laws or regulations. The pigs were far enough from us and our other neighbors that it didn't bother anyone but the people he wanted it to bother. Come fall, when the winter moved in, we sold the pigs to slaughter, and Dad stacked up a bunch of building supplies next to the pen and let the neighbors know we would be expanding the profitable operation in the spring when they came out to scream at him. He smiled the whole time, speaking in his slow, steady way. The new neighbors sold their new house in January when the ground was frozen, and the new owners would not smell the pen. Though, as soon as the old neighbors were gone, we tore down the enclosure, spread the nasty stuff on the hayfield, and the new neighbors never had a bad smell come spring. They also were great neighbors and are still lifelong friends. Never mess with a rancher. The next story is titled, From Sandwich to Charger. Happened to me last Monday while I was waiting for an appointment. There was a guy running around the station asking people passing him for money for a sandwich and water. I normally don't have money on me, only a card, so I offered to go with him to a store and let him pick a sandwich and a bottle of water, and I would pay for it. He agrees, but as soon as we start walking to the store, he suddenly started to tell me about how he cannot call his family and change directions to the vending machines. The water bottles in the store cost around 1 CHF. At the vending machine, it's 350 CHF a bottle, and you also can't get sandwiches out of it. First I was confused. He then pointed to a 20 CHF power bank and wanted me to get one of these for him so he can call his family. I then walked away, and he continued to ask people for money for a sandwich and a bottle of water. The next story is titled, American Tourists Wanted My Table in the Pub. The barman had my back. Back before I knew what COVID was, I visited a pub in Dublin. In the pub, you can sit and disregard your responsibilities, spending hours reading, drinking, chatting, playing board games and cards, and listen to old men tell tall tales, one of which you're about to hear now. I chose to read a book and stay all day drinking pints and relaxing. The pub had a fair bit of history, so I figured it was a good part of town to take my leisure and while away for 6 hours. And pints or so. It was about 3 p.m. by this point. I had been there since 10 and had drunk about 5 pints, leisurely, and gotten a fair chunk of my book read. It was busy, but not too loud. Until, however, a particular group of girls came into the pub. I heard them before I saw them, and they were fresh off the plane with their suitcases in tow, all wearing sweatshirts with big letters on them, saying to me that they all went to American universities. There were no seats left. I was sitting at a corner table and had about 4 unused stools around, which anyone was welcome to take or join me. Excuse me, a voice did cry. We want to sit here. You can if you like. There's plenty of room, says I. No, sorry, you don't understand. We want you to move so we can sit there. Well, I'm not ready to move yet. Why not sit down with me? It's perfectly fine. I don't mind the company. They proceeded to whine and groan that they just want to enjoy the pub and that I'm being really selfish. One of them went to get the manager. The manager arrives with one of the girls leading the way. She points at me saying he won't move. Manager of the pub wasn't very pleased with being torn away, and why would he? He's been here all day. It was at that point they all turned on him, decrying the service and demanding that they were going to take their business elsewhere. Okay then, that's for the best. I think there's no room here really for you in your big cases anyway. He gave them some nice recommendations in the area, and away they went. The barman comes over with a card reader asking if I wanted another pint and mentioned that I looked pretty comfy, so it didn't look like I wanted to move. Proceeded to have a couple more pints, chuck a $5 in the tip jar, and then get the duck out. Pretty sharpish after that. Someone else could have been using the table. How selfish of me. The last story is titled, My Manager is Physically and Emotionally Abusive, so I get her undercover bosses and fired. One summer I was working as a server at a well-known pizza restaurant. It was in a small tourist town, so it was amazing money, and as a university student, that was all that mattered to me. This job was so horrible that I would go home wanting to quit, count my tips, and decide I could put up with it for one more day. The reason it was so horrible was because of the manager, Tracy. Tracy was hot-headed, irrational, a liar, a manipulator, and overall a terrible human being. I watched her terrorize the other servers and kind of kept my head down to avoid it. Examples of her being awful. She once screamed at me because the entire restaurant didn't have cutlery on the tables, because the restaurant physically didn't have enough, and she was too cheap to order more. I was in the middle of filling drinks for a table when she made me stop and go into the kitchen to run the dishwasher. She then yelled at me because that table didn't have full drinks. This all happened in front of a guest who ended up saying something to Tracy about her behavior. After Tracy left, the guest assured me that she was going to be reporting her. Once another server was running her food, Tracy physically grabbed the server by the arm and pulled her back into the kitchen because that server didn't run the ticket before hers. They got into a screaming match and the cops were called. The server sent me photos of her bruised arm the next day. Tracy played the cops like a fiddle. It was like that never happened and batted her eyelashes. I'm not sure how she got away with that. My sister was the hostess, and she was only making $12 a week in tip out. The other servers and I did the math, and my sister should have been taking home $40 a night. Ironically, Tracy had a new boat and a new truck. My sister messed up, I don't remember how, and Tracy took me into the back of the restaurant to scream at me. We were out of there for a full 15 minutes before the supervisor told her they needed me back. This supervisor was an angel, and she comes back into the story a bit. This was a while ago, and I'm sure I'll think of more, but for now I will continue with the story. Tracy's reputation in the town was awful. The locals would not eat there because of her. In a small community, everyone had a story about her. I would get sympathy when people found out where I worked, so that tells you just how bad it was. Supervisors told the franchisees about how bad the working conditions were, but every time they would investigate, she would turn into a completely different person. She was kind and helpful, and working for that side of her wasn't so bad. But when they weren't there, the working conditions were awful again. It seemed like they would never catch her in her natural element. The revenge part of my story began on the last day of work. We had a health inspection and failed, so I knew Tracy would be particularly awful that day. I looked at the angel of a supervisor and told her that if Tracy screamed at me, then I was walking out. The supervisor said she wouldn't blame me and didn't know why I had put up with it so long. So anyway, Tracy gets in, and of course she starts yelling at me until I start crying. I finished my last table and walked out, taking my sister with me. Down 2 staff members, the restaurant was in trouble. We drove by it 30 minutes later, and there was a lineup outside the door because there was no hostess seating people. When I got home, I messaged all the staff that had quit over the summer. I told them that I was whistleblowing and that they should too. The girl that was physically assaulted ended up writing a letter and sending photos of her bruised arm. My letter ended up being 2 pages long, single-spaced, and included everything I've mentioned, with emphasis on her taking 2 different personalities when the franchisers were there. A few months later, My sister got a message from the dishwasher saying that Tracy got fired and the Angel supervisor took her position. Because of that, I decided to go back the following summer. I was hired immediately. While working there, I discovered the results of my actions. The restaurant was rated the lowest in the country under Tracy's management. This, coupled with the whistleblowers and the civilian complaints, resulted in serious investigation. I don't remember how high up in the company he was, but a higher-up ended up going to the restaurant under the intent that he was a new supervisor coming to help because she was short-staffed. He observed her behavior for 2 weeks. After the 2 weeks, he told her, "Here's the step-by-step plan of how we're going to fix the restaurant." Her response was, "Who the duck do you think you are?" I guess when he told her, the expression on her face was priceless. I wish I saw it. Anyway, she obviously got fired and is now working at a fast food pizza place in the same town. The place is always empty because the locals still actively boycott her. I knew it was long, but thanks for sticking with me. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.